In the beginning, we create the enemy. Before the weapon comes the image. Every confrontation starts in the imagination first. Before any words are said, before fists are thrown, before weapons are used, we need a point to direct ourselves towards. We need an enemy to fight against. So in this video, we're going to explore the idea that we don't just wait for an enemy to appear, but instead actively create one. Because by inventing an enemy, we can feel more certain about who we are. And in a distorted way, an enemy helps me to define myself and my identity, exactly who I am and who I am not, regardless of how accurate the conclusion actually is. And I'm going to frame this absolutely enormous topic in 5 stages through Sam Keen's incredibly eye-opening work, which is called The Faces of the Enemy. I hope that shows up on the screen there. And I'm going to drop in a fair number of quotes too, because he's got a really beautiful way with words. So in short, Sam Keen argues that we have progressed from Homo sapiens, which is rational human, to Homo faber, which is tool-making human, to Homo hostilis, the hostile species, which is the enemy-making animal, to hopefully in the future, Homo amicus, which is friendly human. And our immediate focus is on step 3, specifically what is happening internally that encourages us to make enemies. What is this enemy making process and what is it trying to achieve? What do we gain by doing this? Who is Homo hostilis? So, as we said earlier, before a fight can begin or a war can be fought, there needs to be an enemy to fight against. And if there isn't a clear and obvious enemy to focus on, our tendency is going to be to create one, an us versus them dynamic. If I'm this, then they are that. If I'm good, they're evil. If I'm kind, they're malicious. If I'm the hero, they're the villain. And if needs be, we will imagine them into existence, which is exactly why Sam Keen says that truth is the first sacrifice we make in order to belong to any exclusive group. And by peeling away the truth, we move away from logical and rational thought back into mythological thinking. We resort to a hostile imagination that divides the world in two, like we've just seen, good versus evil, hero versus villain. And in defining who the enemy is, it helps us to define ourselves. Now, obviously, it's not the best method and it's far too simplistic, which causes a lot of problems that we see around us, but it does have a functional purpose of helping to give us an identity. So one problem lies in this mythical way of thinking. When we generalize and mythologize the enemy, we're not rationally arguing or disagreeing anymore. We're just failing to accept the traits or the characteristics that exist inside of us, and we're just throwing them onto somebody else, or more likely a group or a collective. So what we're doing is banishing our unwanted traits onto the other. We make enemies because it's easier to see those traits within them rather than realizing that those traits are actually within us. It's projection. So, to quote Sam Keen, by this sleight of hand, the unacceptable parts of the self are recognized only as qualities of the enemy. So through projection, we are avoiding a confrontation with our own shadow. But the more we deny this repressed part of ourselves, the more it will show up in the other person. I can see that there's unfairness, unkindness, and arrogance in the world, but I treat people fairly, with kindness, and I'm very humble, so it can't possibly be me. It must be them. These are the 4 words that define the enemy-making process. And it's in this major oversimplification that we begin to deny our true selves and our actual capabilities. I might prefer to act kindly and be thought of as kind by others, but I need to also learn to accept that there are times when I haven't acted this way. And if I don't own these moments, then I will cast them out. I can't completely deny them because I know they exist, because as I can see them, as I can feel them, I can experience them to some degree. But if I come to the conclusion that they're not mine, then they must be yours. And that's the mythical, simplified mindset. So in this sense, the enemy is a mirror. What I dislike most in others is what I deny about myself. So if I felt guilt or shame about a certain action or behavior, then this can be really difficult to accept. So it's far easier to simply bypass the difficult feeling, reframe the situation, or just blame someone else, regardless of how guilty or innocent they actually are. We come to accidentally and unconsciously create a hate bond with the enemy. We create a mutual hostility. I hate them because they hate me. And I understand who I am because I stand against everything that they are. So whatever they are, I am not. Whatever I am not, they are. We come to be dependent on our enemy for a sense of self, not realizing just how shaky this foundation actually is. And remember, it doesn't matter how accurate this is or not logically, because we're not using logic here. We're in the mythical mindset. A hero needs a villain, otherwise they're just an ordinary person. So we need to be mindful of the roles that we set ourselves, because they, in turn, go on to shape what we see and what we perceive around us in the world. In a bizarre way, enemy making actually brings us comfort. It's the comfort of living in a simple world of no grey areas, just black and white. And as I said before, good and evil, hero and villain, us and them. But historically, any discussions around good and evil typically use at some stage wording like purity or words to that effect. So projection helps to preserve this sense of innocence, but it's a naive and a false way. To blame is to deny both one's responsibility and one's potency, to quote Sam Keen. So projection might give us comfort by helping us to deny our responsibility, but it also removes our sense of agency at the same time. Projecting and not reclaiming limits our potency, which is our potential for action. It numbs us to our potential and also to our vulnerability as well. If I can't act cowardly or in fear or in an anxious way when facing an enemy, I must always appear to be acting tough and strong and resilient and ready. So what happens is my fear hides my anger. But my fear still exists. It can be packaged up as anger if that's what I have to resort to, but it's not true anger. It's a distortion. And no matter what words I use to justify it to others, when I'm trying to go to sleep at night, but I can't because I've got all these unwanted thoughts and emotions running through my mind, I know what it is that I'm feeling at that point. It's fear. So blaming others is comforting to some degree, but it's absolutely soul-destroying in another sense. And if the enemy is a vague threat rather than a specific act that has been done to me, or against me, by a specific person at a specific time, then I need to be prepared for any enemy at any time. So we put our defenses up just in case. And when we move from particulars to the abstract, we realize that there's actually not much comfort to be had at all. There's just defenses and tactics and plans all the time. So when we feel empty and burned out, it can be useful to understand what it is they're actually burned out against. What is the boundary that we've put up and that we're wasting time and energy defending? Where could that energy be better spent? Where am I ready to start living my own life and stop pretending to be a false hero fighting a false enemy? And we talked earlier about this idea of forming a hate bond. We could also call this an adversarial symbiosis, to use the language from the book. If both sides agree that each other are the enemy, then it justifies avoiding doing the inner work that actually made this enemy making relevant in the first place. All we're doing here is reinforcing the defense mechanism, which prolongs the fight, which makes life unnecessarily difficult. So to quote Sam Keen at length on page 27, we scapegoat and create absolute enemies, not because we are intrinsically cruel, but because focusing our anger on an outside target, striking at strangers, brings our tribe or our nation together and allows us to be a part of a close and loving in-group. We create surplus evil because we need to belong. So just to repeat that last line, we create surplus evil because we need to belong. And it's the need to belong that we need to learn to refocus on. The self rather than the other, the us rather than the them. And this is where this is extremely important again, because this projection, it must come from us. It might look like it originates in them, but it's us first casting out the quality only for it to then be hooked onto them. Their unfairness is my unfairness. Their arrogance is my arrogance. Their anger is my anger. We need to stop splitting the world into heroes versus villains, because when we stop to truly look at ourselves, we might realize that actually we're false heroes fighting a made-up battle that we created, and then we waste energy to continually justify. To what extent are they really the enemy? Are they really the villains? And that doesn't mean that we were secretly the villains all along, but it does open up a third option. Instead of creating conclusions and jumping to justify them, we can instead focus on questioning. So we can practice refusing the temptation to label ourselves in the world and instead focus on our actions that tilt us in one direction compared to another. To focus on the verbs and not the nouns. To look at our intentions and the behaviours that follow, not the rhetoric and the jargon which are used to persuade others and ourselves. And this is where we must ask ourselves some quite confronting questions. And I don't mean that abstractly. I mean, here are some actual questions to start considering, and to what extent you're involved in this enemy-making process yourself. So firstly, identify the traits of your enemies and those that you dislike. What does this reveal about yourself? And which of these traits feel strangely familiar? Which of them have you been denying in yourself? And what do you secretly gain or secretly enjoy about having an enemy? And what are the words, phrases, or general language that you use that creates or upholds this us versus them divide? And come back to these at the end of the video. Even if you only answer one of them, you'll be making good progress away from that mythical mindset and towards a more holistic approach to life. So one final quote and question from Sam Keen feels appropriate at this stage, and this is taken from page 177. The proper stance for us is commitment to the discipline of questioning. If we don't yet know new answers, we can at least refuse to be hypnotized by old questions. Our addiction to the old question, how can we defeat the enemy and be secure, is moribund. The question that must become an ultimate concern in our time is how may we reduce our enmity? Now, this is a word that I've intentionally been avoiding, but it refers to a more intense dislike of someone or something. So it's much more of a hostile and active approach, like holding a grudge, rather than just disliking someone. And the word in here is also important as well. I just want to draw your attention to it. It's to reduce, not to eliminate. We're going back to that grey area rather than the temptation of black versus white. So what we need to learn to do is to outgrow our need for enemies. Just to try to tidy all this up to make this a bigger picture. We can do this by looking inwards first rather than outwards. By looking at what we've pushed into our shadow, consciously or unconsciously, and starting to own our feelings of guilt, fear, vulnerability, anxiety, and resentment, amongst many others. We need to stop putting up a defense against ourselves. It might feel like an ironic first step, but we need to identify our enemies first, because that's going to reveal more about us than any self-inquiry ever can. We can learn more about ourselves through the other person. And returning viewers to this channel know that I always encourage you to check out the primary sources for yourself, and today is absolutely no different. All of this is based around a few quotes taken from Sam Keen's Faces of the Enemy, and the full title of that is Reflections of the Hostile Imagination. And it's a great exploration of the collective shadow, if you're interested in shadow work. I've focused here mainly on the individual shadow and the enemy-making tendency that we each have. And this book discusses what this looks like on a larger scale in terms of governments and countries as well. It's an eye-opening read, to say the very, very least. So, just to return to the start of this video, Keen argued that we progressed from Homo sapiens, the rational human, to Homo faber, the tool-making human, to Homo hostilis, the hostile species, the enemy-making animal, to hopefully in the future, Homo amicus, the friendly human. And it's between steps 2 and 3 that we've learned to use this tool-making facility to create enemies, but it also opens up the door for us to use this facility for good. We can also create communities and meaning and a hopeful future using the exact same capacity. So this isn't all doom and gloom. It's important to see how we can misuse this capacity first and notice the temptation for projection. But the hopeful and optimistic news is that we can then reverse this process and move into reclamation of these traits. We can integrate our shadows as well as cast them out. And that improves the quality of our lives enormously, the integration. In the beginning, we create the enemy. Before the weapon comes the image. So what image have you been forming without realizing it?